In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So before we start, did anybody notice anything about the readings we read today in the liturgy? What? They were all about evangelism. Every single one of the readings was about evangelism. Even the Synaxarion was about evangelism. Okay? And then the liturgy gospel had the exact same theme verse that we're using, about the harvest. So I thought it was really cool, like maybe a message that God is sending us, kind of confirming what we're doing here and how important this is for our church and for the world, that we should be going and evangelizing. And over the last couple of days, we've talked so much about how we talk to other people and how we engage them and how we care about them and how we share our faith with them. There's another aspect to evangelism, which I call passive evangelism, which is the idea of once we are able to engage with someone, once we're able to talk to them and we invite them where? Like, what do we do with them? What is the next step after we kind of successfully introduce somebody to Christ or to our faith? We want to invite them to the church. The church is the place where salvation happens. The church is the place of the sacraments. Someone is not going to be saved simply because we tell them Christ is great and then they go off. Eventually, at some point in their walk, they have to come to the church and they have to become members of the church and they have to be baptized. So how is that going to happen? We hear many stories about people that come to various churches and maybe they feel unwelcome, or they feel they don't understand, or they feel that the church just is not a place for them. And I serve in an American Coptic church, and one thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, if my church is supposed to be filled primarily with Americans, not Egyptians, then what is it that I have to do to make the church a place that is not just warm and welcoming, because yes, that's definitely a part of it, but a place where the people can actually find orthodoxy to be accessible to them. There's different schools of thought as to how we make the church available and accessible to Americans. Americans are people that didn't grow up in the church. They don't know much about what we believe. They never attended Sunday school. There's a lot of things they don't understand, and they walk into it cold without having much kind of background. And maybe the only experience they've had with church is typically Protestant church, and what they see when they walk into our churches is so different. What is it that we do so that when they come to our churches, they find that it's a place that they're able to learn the things that they don't know, they're able to engage with it, they're able to find it accessible to them? And the two different schools of thought that I've found is, one is, whenever there's something that is difficult for them, maybe we should just cancel it. Okay? I've been to churches where fasting is not encouraged, where when you walk in, you'll find that the food that's being offered is not fasting food. For that purpose. Saying, you know what, well, we want to be attractive to Americans. And if Americans are not used to fasting, so we're going to cancel it. I've seen churches where no long hymns are chanted, because again, it's something that's difficult for people to understand. What is it? What are these churches? What are these hymns? I've never heard anything like this before. I can't participate in it. Okay? That's one school of thought. Everything that is kind of foreign and strange, that's going to be an obstacle to Americans, we're going to either cancel it, or we're going to reduce its importance, or we're going to kind of put it to the fringe, where yeah, maybe we talk about it every once in a while, but it's not really central. Another school of thought, when it comes to this idea of passive evangelism, making the church accessible to Americans, saying we're going to keep everything the same, okay? And we're not going to compromise anything at all. And everything's going to stay exactly the same. We're not going to touch it, okay? But a lot of times what happens is the problem that we have now. Is many people might come in, and yes, it's deep and it's spiritual and it's there, but they have no understanding of it. They can't engage it. They're not able to participate in that deepness and that spirituality. Father Alexander Schmemann, he said the only reason that the church changes is so that it remains the same. And what does that mean? It means that in whatever culture that the church exists, we want to make the church such that that culture can engage in the true spirituality of the church, in the true faith of the church, in the true theology of the church. And that's the goal. We have different rites, we have different hymns, and all the different Orthodox churches in the world. And the reason is is because for that culture, what they found is that is the best way for that culture to engage the church. You can't separate culture from church. You can't separate culture from church. You can't say, I'm going to remove all culture from the church. If you remove all culture from the church, then you have no one in the church. Because the minute you begin to speak a language in the church, you've necessarily introduced a culture, right? The only place where there is no culture in the church is in heaven, where there is no differences, where we all share one language, we all have the same mind, we all share everything as one, and there is no obstacle to understanding in heaven. There is no one culture versus another in heaven. But while we are here on the earth, there necessarily has to be some culture. And when we say American Coptic Orthodox, we're saying we want the culture of the church to be primarily directed toward American culture, to what Americans, the way Americans think. Okay? So we don't want to go to one extreme and say, you know, I'm going to cancel everything that doesn't make sense. And we don't want to go to the other extreme and say, you know what, we're not going to change anything and it's going to be exactly the same. What we want to do is we want to say, I don't want to compromise the faith. I don't want to compromise the liturgy. I don't want to compromise the hymns. I don't want to compromise the fasting. But I recognize and acknowledge that the people coming don't know anything about the liturgy and don't know anything about fasting and don't know anything about anything that we're doing. So with that mindset, we develop programs, we develop services, we develop kind of a mindset among the people that when people come from the outside, we know what they need. And because we know what they need, we have services to accommodate them. We have services to teach them. You know, for example, in a church that's going to be primarily made up of Americans, you're going to have a much, much larger emphasis on education for adults than you would in a typical Coptic church. Because typical Coptic people that grew up in the church have attended Sunday school most of their life, and they have such an understanding of the Coptic faith even from when they were children. Whereas someone who's coming to the church as an adult, you know, they don't have that. And maybe in our current churches, you'll find 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 people that maybe come as converts to the church, but they're still a minority. So the majority of adults in the church, in our current churches, they have an understanding of theology. They have an understanding, basic. I'm not talking about necessarily all the ingrained, you know, very deep details of some things. They have an understanding of our practices of what we do. But if you have an American Coptic church and you're expecting that there's going to be primarily American adults that are coming to the church, what you're going to find is a very large number of people might be coming that don't necessarily have that background. So how do we develop a program to teach that to them? It's like a Sunday school, but it's for adults. Okay? Well, how do we do it? Not just education, but we have to have a mindset of where these people are coming from. What is their culture? If this is something we want to make accessible to them, we have to understand where they are coming from. And that's what I want to speak about. I want to speak about American culture. I want to speak about some characteristics of American culture and things that we should be keeping in mind. Also, when we speak about American culture, we have to realize that there is no one singular American culture. America is a very diverse nation. It's a very pluralistic nation. And even among Christian Protestants, as Thilo and Anastassi were saying, there's so many different experiences that you might find. You might find a Methodist church different from a Lutheran church, different from a Baptist church, different from a non-denominational, different from any kind of evangelical churches. And you have the high church, you have the low church, you have the broad church. You have one church, like an Episcopal church, where they're very reverent and everyone is standing and it's kind of peaceful and quiet. And then you have other churches where it's like rock and roll music, okay? That's very irreverent. You have one church where people are dressed kind of in what we would typically call church clothes, and you have other people that come dressed in shorts and sleeveless shirts. So what is American culture when it comes to Christianity? It's a very difficult question to answer. So again, when we speak about what is it that we have to do to our church to make it accessible to Americans, well, why is it that sometimes the first kind of response that we hear from people is, you know what, we have to change? Well, what is it that we have to change? There are people among American Christians that dress like us. There are people among American Christians that sing hymns that, you know, maybe are not so different from us. So we have to be kind of very seriously like considering this question, because this is going to affect the face of the Orthodox Church and the Coptic Church in the United States in the future. We are kind of at a transition point now where more and more and more of the churches are going to become more English speaking. They're going to become filled with more people of American culture, whether with those of an Egyptian background or those with an American background, born here with no Egyptian genes at all. So what do we want the church to look like? This is what we're deciding. This is what we're determining right now in this point in time, is what do we want the church to look like? And the decisions we make today is going to determine what the church actually looks like in the future. And if we make a decision to lower the standard of orthodoxy, to say, you know what, that's what we need to do, we're going to reap the results of that decision. So we have to be very careful in what we do. So I'm going to speak about 18 points. I know it sounds like a lot, but we won't spend so much time. These 18 points are things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to making the church accessible to Americans. That when an American person walks in and we want to understand who is this person, of course everyone is unique and different. But there are some things that you'll find are very common in the United States that maybe are not so common in Egyptian culture. And so when we talk about how can the church serve people with an American culture, we have to understand these things. Okay? The first one is relationships and marriage. Okay? And this has changed gradually over time, but maybe we're all aware that in the old days, it was kind of unseemly and unheard of that a boy and a girl, even who are courting, would be together alone at any time or go out together at any time. Whereas now it's changed to where it's kind of accepted. Okay? In American culture, dating is very normal. And dating for no reason. Dating simply because we have fun dating, not because we're actually considering marriage. So if you have people with an American mindset that are coming to the church and they're thinking this way, okay, how is it that we teach them that this is not appropriate? How do we teach them that the only reason we date is because of marriage? Because we want to see if this person can be a lifelong partner for us or not. Something we have to keep in mind. What is the purpose of marriage? That marriage is permanent. Marriage is not something that we enter into with the idea that we think that we can get out of it. Okay? Because again, here in the United States, many Americans, including Christians, have that mindset. Marriage is not really permanent. Marriage is there kind of as something that we engage in and we do, but people sign prenuptial agreements. People are, almost have a backup plan. Many people have separate accounts, bank accounts. They don't want to completely kind of merge all their assets together because they have some kind of independence. When people who are American attend our crowning ceremonies, and I've heard this before, when we speak about how the women should submit to the husband, I hear people laughing in the church, Americans, because to them it's such a foreign concept. One of the churches that we rented from before we had our permanent location at St. Paul, the previous pastor had put on the website that they will not allow any marriage ceremony conducted in the church that speaks about the submission of a woman to a man. Okay? To this degree, this is something can be considered offensive when you start speaking about the submission of a woman to a man. What does it mean? Are we saying that a woman is less valuable than a man? This is questions that come up even among our own people that we have to have a very good understanding for, because when we start saying this to Americans, it could be an offense. You have to understand what are we actually saying? What are we actually saying? We have to keep this in mind. Divorce is something else. Okay? We take for granted, to a large extent, that most kids in the church have both a father and a mother. I was talking to someone yesterday that, even the announcements that we make, tell your parents, where is your mom and dad? We assume that this is true. But the reality is, in American culture, the divorce rate is extremely high. Many people don't have a father and a mother, or they have a stepfather and a stepmother, or one or the other. There's many situations, many types of family configurations that's not the same as the typical one that we would expect. So one challenge we have is, how do we teach God's plan for family? That this is the plan that God made for the success of family. The family is where we learn most of our Christian education. It's not the church. Because we see an example of how is it that we should live from our parents. And the Bible says, one of the very few things in the Bible that it says that God hates, it says God hates divorce. So how do we teach on the one hand that God hates divorce and it is not the plan for family? But at the same time, we have all these people that are coming into the church that have parents who are divorced or who are divorced themselves. How do we teach them and give them a message of love and acceptance, but at the same time teaching them that this is not what God intended? And yet, there's still hope. It's not because that this happened to you that somehow your life is over and God hates you, and you know. And we ourselves sometimes send this message simply by the way that we treat people who are divorced. Many times, I can't tell you how many times, when a divorce happens, at least one, if not both of the people leave the church, or they try to find another church. And why is that? It's because of the negative looks that they get from people who know them. When they see that you've been divorced, it's like, you know, you have like a mark. You know, this mark is now saying you're an outcast. You know, you're a failure. You weren't able to do it. You didn't compromise, or there's something wrong with you, or whatever it is. Divorce is a sin. But that doesn't mean that we judge these people and we excommunicate them from our assembly simply because that this is what they fell into, this is what happened to them. We are no better than them. How is it that we treat this? This is very important, extremely important, because if we start to treat Americans who have been divorced the way we treat each other who have been divorced, it's not going to work. Okay, we have to seriously consider and look at ourselves and see, is this really what God wants? Is God actually asking us to do this? No, He's not. He's not asking us to judge one another. Abuse. Many people in America have been abused. Do we have any programs to help these people? And I was talking to Sayyidina the other day about somebody who, you know, hadn't been to the church for a long time. And this man was divorced. And I was telling him, you can't just go to this. He's asking, why doesn't he come to the church? And I told him, what are we going to do to get him to come to the church? What is he missing? A Bible study? Is that what he misses? We go give him a Bible study, a visitation at home. I went and visited him home. He has 3 children that he's raising by himself. How is it that we are going to get this person into the church? Well, he needs help. He doesn't need a Bible study. He needs help. People who are abused need to be healed. People who are abused need something beyond just, okay, here's some education about Scripture. Here's a visit from the priest. They need some kind of programs to actually help them. Counseling. They need some way to heal from the abuse that they've had. And then, after this, they'll be able to consider, I'm going to join the church. They're going to see the love that we're giving them, not because we're coming and teaching them about the Bible necessarily, but because we're offering them something that they need, which is healing. Again, in American society, this is very common. I mean, it's common among Egyptian society as well, even more so among American society. We have many people that would be coming to the church broken and having these scars. Many of these people that we're evangelizing to, words are not enough. It's not just a matter of telling people some nice words. They have pain. They have like issues that they need to be resolved, and unless we offer something in the church to resolve them, they would never join. They're not capable of making that choice. They need someone to lift this burden from them first. And this is why I think in the churches we need to place a very strong emphasis on counseling, on healing ministries, on support groups, things that maybe you'll find in other American churches but are just absent from our churches because they're considered to be, embarrassing. People don't want to join a support group. People don't want to talk about their abuse. People don't want to talk about these things. Maybe they'll talk to a priest about it, but a priest can only do so much. If 50% of the congregation suffers from a problem like this, how is the priest going to deal with all of them? They need regular kind of meetings. They need something on a regular basis that is going to help them to grow out of this. Regular counseling. We should have professional Orthodox counselors. One problem that people have, they don't know where to go for counseling. Where do we go? There are Christian counselors, but we have so many people now, people that are interested in counseling. We have an FMP program here in the diocese, or other people that are professional counselors. If every church had a professional counseling office who kind of spearheaded this effort to establish these support groups, it would be something that people could join, and they will feel the love of the church and the people for them, because they will see that people actually care. They're not like shunning them away simply because they have this problem. Sexuality is a very important issue. Okay, again, the standard kind of what we expect, sexual relationships, so that there's a man and a woman who get married. We don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in a world where we take for granted that marriage is between a man and a woman. people come from the outside having completely different beliefs. And schools now teach children that you can have a man and a man, or two men and a woman, or whatever kind of configuration you want. Children are taught that these are all okay. And the reason that we maybe don't feel that it's okay is because we were taught this at a young age. But if you have people that were taught at a young age that you could have two men or two women living together and raising a child, and they themselves have been raised by two women or two men, and they love their parents, okay, how is it that we're going to teach them otherwise? How is it that we're going to receive them into the church? How is it if you have a homosexual couple who's interested in joining the church or is inquiring about the church, how is it that they are actually going to come to the church and the congregation is going to tolerate their presence? It's very difficult. And how are we going to get the congregation to do this? We're not accepting them in the sense that we're not accepting what they're doing. We're not accepting their actions. We're not accepting this relationship as a valid relationship. And we're going to have to teach that this is not valid. But at the same time, just as any sinner who comes to the church, we have to give them the opportunity for salvation. So how do we do it? Okay? I'm not giving answers here, if you notice. Okay? I'm presenting things that need answers, because these are the questions that we have to answer in order for this to work. Okay? In order for this thing that we call American Orthodoxy to work, we have to find answers to these questions. And there might not be a single answer, but we have to develop some kinds of answers and maybe agree on them too, and how we're going to deal with the situations, because they're going to happen more and more and more often. Okay? How do we deal with people who are transgender? There was one person actually who came to the church before I was ordained, found the church online, decided he wants to come to the church. So I said, you know, the priest referred him to me, and he wanted to learn more about the church. So I was curious about him, so I went online and I searched for his name until I found out that it was a transgender person. He looked like a boy, but he was actually a girl. And this person attended everything. They were the first person to come to church in Matins. They came to Vespers. They attended all through midnight praises. They attended every Bible study, everything that you can imagine, they attended. And so I didn't know how to bring up this issue. So I spoke with my father of confession, and he told me, give him some kind of a one-on-one Bible study where you present to him absolutely everything about the church that you can think of. And in the middle of that, present what our views are about transgender and homosexuality. So I said, okay. So I gave him a presentation about theology and history and this and this and this. And in there was some social things. And in there I spoke about our belief of homosexuality and transgender. And I was believing this whole time that he was going to become, it's really a she was going to become so upset at what I said that she's just going to leave and not want to come again. But I was surprised at the end. She was like so happy. It's like, yeah, this is great and all this. There was another time where she was in a class where it was just so happened that the topic was homosexuality. And she had no problem with it. So, you know, how is it we're going to deal with these situations? They can be touchy. We have to teach what we believe. We can't.
So what happened?
So they continued to attend the church for a few months, until one point where, you know, the Abuna, you know, decided, you know, it was time to kind of confront them with this, because now they've been attending for quite some time. And he talked to her about it. She wasn't happy. And then after that, she said, like, you know, her mom doesn't want her to attend the church anymore. That's what she said. So when she didn't come again. So it's not clear whether that was really the real reason or not. But, you know, these kinds of things need a balanced approach. They need us to demonstrate that we love the person and we care about them, but at the same time we don't accept what they're doing. And it also takes servants that are kind of trained to understand this, because sometimes our first reaction could be like, no, you know, this, we don't do this here. Kids of Manny. These are the sick people that God is sending to the hospital that we need to treat. So we have to be able to receive them. It's kind of like a hospital that doesn't have an ER. You know, you take the patient there and you're like, sorry, we don't We don't deal with your kind of sickness here. We have to be able to deal with every sickness, right? This is why God established the church. Another characteristic of American, there's two kind of extremes of American culture. One is the hyper-rational mindset. Everything has to have an answer, and everything, we apply the scientific method on everything. And scientists are like, they spend so much time trying to figure out what happened in the first nanoseconds after the Big Bang. Right? This is something that we try to understand and explore. If something doesn't have a rational explanation, then many times it's rejected. Okay? There are some things, Christianity, that we can't wrap our minds around. There are some things when we speak, that we have to walk by faith. There are some things that we receive the answer only after we've expressed a faith in it before we understand. Okay? Many of the things Christ did, he didn't explain to us. And he didn't explain it to the apostles as it happened. Maybe they understood it later, but he didn't explain it to them at the time when he asked them to accept it. For instance, when he told them that they would have to eat his body and blood, and many of his disciples left, he didn't try to explain it in more detail at that point. Okay? But only for those who accepted his words and accepted it based on his character, based on who he was, not based on the words that he said, then later they understood and they actually participated in communion, and then they fully understood what he meant. So God asks us to accept things, and he wants us to accept them not on the basis of whether they make sense to us, but accept them on the basis of our trust in him as a person. And then after we show him this trust, then many times we will understand. But this hyper-rational mindset that we find in American culture seeks to understand immediately. I seek to understand everything, and we all exhibit this as well. I mean, those of us who grew up here, maybe more than others. But we want to understand everything, and then once we understand everything, then we choose. Okay, does this make sense or doesn't make sense? I mean, look how much effort we put in just, when we want to just, buy a computer, or we want to buy anything. We go on Google and we research and this and this and this and reviews, and until we do all those things, we don't feel comfortable making a choice. Okay? That mindset and that idea of having all this information available to you at any time also comes into Christianity, into religion, because people want to understand before they believe. And sometimes that can be an obstacle. Sometimes it can be a good thing, but sometimes it can be an obstacle. How are we going to deal with people with this mindset? Okay, how are we going to feed them all the information that they need to understand and know, so that they would be willing to accept the things that they don't understand and they don't know? On the flip side, you have people who are more postmodern, okay, and are thinking in terms of religion is not something that is absolute. Religion is not something that is kind of your belief in something that exists or doesn't exist. Religion is simply a set of beliefs that makes you feel good about yourself. Religion is simply something that I believe that makes me feel good about my existence, makes me feel good about my purpose. It's all about a feeling. It's not about an absolute truth that either exists or doesn't exist. And that word religion has been transformed by people who are postmodern to mean this. This is why they have no problem with there being conflicts, like the whole coexist bumper sticker. Okay? It's all about, we don't define religion as truth, or we actually redefine what true means. Okay? To be whatever makes me feel good about myself, whatever I want to believe, whatever fits me, whatever is true for me. And these people are very, very difficult to explain orthodoxy to, because it's one thing to want to prove that what we believe is true. For instance, if you go to a Muslim, you have some arguments you can make to say that Muhammad is not the prophet of God. You have arguments that you can make to say Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And if you're able to convince the Muslim that what they believe is false and what you believe is true, then maybe they would be willing to convert, because it's based on information. Islam and Judaism all believe in absolute truth. There is a truth that we're trying to discover, and we have different opinions of what that truth is, but we believe there is such a thing as truth. Whereas in postmodernism, there is no such thing as truth. So the first thing is, that's why like when we argue with a postmodern person, it's not about, here are the facts. It's about, we have to get that person to believe that there is such a thing as truth to begin with. And that's maybe a more difficult job. And as we have, this idea of postmodernism also has infiltrated the church. People who don't believe that Christ is the only way of salvation. People who want to believe that people with other religions are also saved. It's either based on what Christ said, or it's based on what you say. Okay? It's either based on my opinion, or it's based on the Bible. Okay? But people who take part of the Bible, and part of what they believe, and part of this religion, and part of this and that, what are the odds that that's actually true? Like, what are the odds that this mishmash of things is actually true? I mean, you either believe that the Bible is a revelation from God, or you believe that it is not. And so if it is not the revelation from God, then what makes you feel that a specific part of it is, for you to believe in it? So either believe in the Bible, or believe in nothing of the Bible, but don't pick what you want to believe. Okay? If something is a fraudulent document, you can't decide which part is fraudulent. You can't decide which part is a hoax on your own. This is something we have to deal with, the idea of postmodernism. Also, spirituality. Many people are spiritual. And if you go on Google and you search for spirituality or spiritual, you will find no Christian links, at least not at the beginning of the search. You will find Buddhism. You'll find people who, have this sense of individualistic spirituality, as opposed to there being like a common, ritualistic form or organized religion. It's much harder to come by, because people consider that organized religion is against spirituality. Okay? And that spirituality is something altogether different. So we might find people that are spiritual, that are coming, that say, you know what, I really like the Orthodox Church, I really, I like the incense, I like the hymns, I like these kind of things, but at the same time, I'm combining this with other beliefs that I have on my own, because it's not one or the other, it's a combination of things. And this combination of things can be a problem, okay, a big problem. How do we convince people that it's all or nothing? It's either you believe that this is true, or it's not true. And if you want to have spirituality, the Orthodoxy has the deepest spirituality, but you have to understand how to get to it. Like Tila was saying before, people confuse emotion with spirituality. And until you can convince people that those are not the same thing, it's a much quicker approach to find emotion using many other different means than in the Orthodox Church. So if someone thinks that emotion is spirituality, they're going to find it. And they're going to find it somewhere else, perhaps. We have to have an understanding that this is where they're coming from. So that when someone begins to speak about the spirituality they're experiencing elsewhere, ask them, is that really spirituality? Is that really what you're experiencing? What is spirituality? Is spirituality how you feel when you walk out of prayer? Is that spirituality? Or is spirituality how you change when you walk out of prayer? That happens over a long period of time. What is it that Christ asks us to be? He asks us to be like Him. When in the Bible does Christ speak about how He was feeling? He doesn't speak at all about how He was feeling. We have no idea how He was feeling. But we saw what He was doing. We saw how He was acting. We saw how He was praying. We saw how He was healing. We saw how He was doing actions. But the way that He felt as He did it all was not very important. That wasn't the point. The point is, what did He do, not how did He feel. And so spirituality also, it's about what we do. It's about that we become conformed to Christ and we begin to act like Him, we begin to think like Him. It has nothing to do with how we feel. And this is, we have to educate people on what does spirituality actually mean. Also, American culture is very individualistic. Okay? It's all about the person. It's all about the individual. When we speak about the American dream is a very individual dream. It's a dream about me. About that I started out a certain way, and then I worked really hard, then I succeeded, and now here I am very successful. It's an individual dream. And many of the things in American culture are very individualistic as opposed to being corporate. Okay? Capitalism in itself is by nature individualistic. Okay? Because I'm looking out for myself. So when someone comes to the church, a church who is very corporate, where you don't say, I am the body of Christ, but we are the body of Christ. We together, as the church together, are the body of Christ. So how is it that I can become one with this body? How is it that I participate in this group, in this body, in the bride of Christ as a whole? And it's not just about me. Many, many people that I speak to say, you know what, I just read my Bible and I pray to God, and that's religion, that's spirituality, that's faith. Okay, what I do on my own. You're not going to take communion by yourself. Okay, because by definition, communion is a union with someone else. And we take communion together to be united with God and united with each other. And so many people struggle with this. Maybe they like the church, but they think the church is optional. Because I'm really not comfortable being a member with other people in something. I like it on my own. I like to be in a relationship with God and pray and do all these things on my own. very moral people, very like, good people, like people who are going to, they love God, they care about their faith, they care about the moral life, they care about pleasing God, but they all do it by themselves. They don't want to be part of the church. But unfortunately, salvation is only in the church. So if you have someone who's like this, we have to speak to them and say, you know what? Like, that's great that you're doing those things, and that's very disciplined of you, but explain that this is not salvation. Okay? In the ark during the flood, Noah and his family and the animals, they were all together in the ark. Nobody launched out on their own and was saved on their own. They were all saved together. Another aspect of American culture is democracy. Okay. Democracy is about that we corporately decide our future. We corporately decide our leaders. We corporately decide everything. And if there's something that I don't like, then I vote in other people who will do what it is that I want to do. It's more difficult for people who are used to democracy to accept the idea of submission and obedience to someone that I don't agree with, that I don't appreciate, that I wish they weren't there. And this is a problem, because in the church, obviously, there are some things that are democratic. For instance, when a priest is selected, then the congregation votes. You say, okay, is this something someone you feel comfortable with? But once they vote this person in, there's no voting him out. He's there, okay? And we submit to the authority in the church. The priests submit to the bishops, and the people submit also to the priests and the bishops. And it's not just about, some people think that the idea of obedience, that it's just about, I want the best decision made. So if we have a problem, and different people have different opinions about how to solve this problem, okay? You know what? There are times when maybe the priest or the bishop don't make the best decision. They're human beings, after all. There are times where they don't make the best decision. But if I put in my mind, I'm only going to obey whenever it's the best decision, then I will never obey. Because I'm always going to think that my way is better than somebody else's way. The obedience that I demonstrate in obeying either the priest or the bishop or the hierarchy of the church is actually more important than the outcome of the decision. Like, that's how important obedience is. Because if I cannot obey a human being that I see, how is it that I'm going to obey God whom I cannot see? Instead, what I'm going to do with God is I'm going to imagine Him to be commanding me to do the very thing that I myself want to do. And so I'm always going to feel that I'm in obedience, but I'm actually only obeying myself, only doing what I myself want. And this is something that's very important to communicate. That in the church, we don't operate according to democracy. And that's not a tyrannical thing. It's not like it's a tyranny. When did God ask the people for their opinion in the Old Testament? He never asked their opinion. He told them, this is what you're going to do. And if they didn't do what it is that God asked them to do, what always happened? Something destructive happened, because God knew better than them. Okay? When it comes to human beings, like I said, we're fallible human beings, but there is the idea of obedience in itself is what keeps the body together. And sometimes, even if the body were to go in the wrong direction, it gets corrected again by God simply because we have remained obedient. In our history, we have had popes in the Coptic Church that were heretics. If we had said at the time, you know what, these popes are heretics, we're going to go start a new church. Because that's what would happen today in other churches. If there was a pastor or a leader of a church who was a heretic, that's what could happen. So you know what? We're going to go start our own church. So where would we be today if that happened? There is a... Yeah.
Sorry, can you just make a the distinction between... So, because I think in the Coptic community in particular, sometimes people follow priest's word like gold, and they'll do anything they say. So that could be dangerous in some cases. So, I mean, is there some kind of distinction you could make? Or also, even if a clergy person is saying something that's against God, I think there's some line.
Sure. But what percentage of the time does a clergy person say something against God compared to all the times where he just says something that people don't want to do?
I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course exceptions to what I'm saying. Also, in terms of like opinions of the priest is a spiritual leader. Okay? He's not a property manager. He's not like an expert in like car manufacturing. There's so much stuff that people ask the priest to do that he has no idea, and he's just giving his opinion. Okay, so take that with a grain of salt. That it's the opinion, and sometimes they press him to give an opinion that, you know, he's just saying, this is my advice.
Yeah, totally.
So that's not obedience, because the priest is not commanding them to do that. That's not obedience. Obedience is when you will do this because this is what the church requires. This is what the church expects. You will do this, and this is going to be a corporate thing or an individual thing. If it's like, for instance, a father of confession speaking to, you know, their son or daughter in confession. So obedience is the idea that I will do even if I don't think it's the best thing or the right thing. I will do it simply because I was told to do it, and that's what keeps the body of Christ together. That's why we don't have schisms, thank God, in our church, just because this is the way we do. And the idea of maintaining unity and not having schism is far more important than some of these decisions that we protest that really are not that important.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the distinction is a command and an opinion.
Yes. Also, wealth and prosperity. Again, for many people in the United States, the goal is wealth and prosperity. And when they come to our church and we tell them, well, you might be poor and suffer, and that could be the will of God, and there's, you know, you're not necessarily going to be rich, that's a point of stumbling for many people. Because some people want to go to churches where that's the message, you know, the prosperity gospel message. So again, how do we take people who are thinking in terms of this and changing their mindset to thinking, you know what, the church is, and God is not promising me wealth. God is not promising me prosperity. God is not promising me health, because if I have the wrong expectation of God, then I'm going to be utterly disappointed in my life and utterly disappointed in God. And this is why people lose their faith in God when tragedies happen, is because they assumed that God had somehow told them, or that they were going to be somehow immune from tragedy, simply because they were believers. And this is the problem. The problem is not in God, the problem is in our expectation. My expectation about God is wrong. The God that I worship is not the God who actually exists. He exists in my mind. He exists in my mind. So we have all these people that are coming with a certain God that they believe in, that's in their mind, that is not the actual real and true God who exists. And we have to get them to realize, you know what, God does exist, but not the one you believe in. Here is the God that actually exists. This is what he really says. This is how he really acts. And all of this is biblical. You know, it's not like this is something, you know, that we're making up. This is not tradition. This is according to the Bible. This is how God reveals himself. We see his example. We see the examples of him in the Bible of how he treats his people. God is not a God of wealth and prosperity. God is a God of eternal wealth and eternal prosperity, not one of temporal wealth and temporal prosperity. Entitlement. Okay? Here in this country, and unfortunately for many of us who grew up here, we become so used to our rights that we become angry and upset about the littlest, smallest thing, simply because we expect that it is my right to receive it. It is my right to have hot coffee. If I don't have hot coffee, when I go to Starbucks, I'm going to become angry, and I'm going to go speak to the manager, and I'm going to tell the manager I don't have hot coffee, and give me a coffee for free. Why? Because I feel that it is my right. I paid the $5, and because I paid the $5, I deserve to have it. Okay? You know, I was watching videos, like, if you've ever seen videos of what happens on like Black Friday in stores, okay, and people screaming and trampling on each other because of the things that they want. The idea of entitlement is all me. It's all about me. I believe that I deserve things. And because I believe I deserve things, the Orthodox message of suffering, the Orthodox message of humility is lost on me. It's just so lost on me. Because it's not compatible. If I feel I deserve something. In Orthodoxy, we don't deserve anything except condemnation. This is what we deserve. Like, we deserve condemnation. And so if I have in my mind that I deserve condemnation, then anything else I receive is wonderful. Like, everything else I receive, any coffee at all, just give me any coffee. And this can change our life. this point right here can really change our life. If I go through my life believing I don't deserve anything, then every day will be a blessing. Simply waking up in the morning will be a blessing because I don't deserve that day. You know, being able to come to the church and praying a liturgy is a blessing. I don't look at it as though it's long and it's boring, all this thing, because I don't even deserve to come to the church. Okay, I remember when I was working before, my boss wanted me to go to this conference, which, I don't know if you've heard of Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is like this professional coach that, like, you know, he coaches like managers and these things, but he's crazy, man. Okay, he uses these like techniques to hypnotize you and do all these things. I was so uncomfortable to going to this thing, I didn't want to go, and for like several weeks I was having to like kind of talk to my boss and not wanting to go to this thing and stressed out about it and like just feeling horrible about it. And then finally I didn't go. My boss was going to fire me because I didn't go and all of this. And then I went to the church one time after that, and I remember like feeling like this environment at the church is it's so holy, and it's so opposite of the environment at that conference would have been. And I remember feeling how blessed I was to be here. The same church that I would go to every day or every week for years, I didn't ever have that feeling until that point where I realized how special this place is. But if we feel entitled, then we're going to walk in here like it's nothing. We're going to walk in here like it's like any other day. In fact, we might come here reluctantly because I really don't want to be here, okay? And I feel like I'm doing God a favor by coming here. Instead of thinking, no, I don't even deserve to come here, and yet God is allowing me into His house, and because of this, I'm thankful. So this idea of changing this entitlement mentality that we have, this is why, you know, to some extent, is a huge difference between Egypt and here. Many Copts in Egypt, they don't feel entitled to anything. They feel so thankful for everything they have, because everything they have, it's like here we have systems that are so perfect and efficient, that guarantee so many things, and because we put our trust in these systems, when the systems don't work or they don't give us what we expect, we get angry. In Egypt, there are no systems. In Egypt, the most basic thing that we take for granted here, it's like if they happen, it's like a blessing. Like, you know, if our car gets hit here, what do? We contact the insurance company, and then this and that, and the police come. If somebody's car gets hit in Egypt, like nothing, you just live with it. Like there's nothing for you to do. So everything that we have here is like tuned to place our trust in the society, to place our trust in the systems, and not to place our trust in God. And that's a problem. It's a big problem. That's why sometimes having faith in America is so difficult, because everything is already provided. Like there's nothing lacking. Everything is provided for us. But we have to remember, who is it blessing us? It's not the government, it's not the system, it's God Himself. Volunteerism, Americans love to volunteer. They love to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than them. And this is great for us, which means that when someone comes to the church, we put them in a service. When someone comes to the church, we say, hey, we need help in whatever, something that they can do. And that's going to help them feel attached to the church. It's going to help them feel like they're a part of the church. Language, obvious thing, okay? In America, we speak English, okay? So when everything is in English, okay? When everything is in English, people are going to feel like they belong. It's a church for them. Actually, Sayyidina Amba Yusuf, he told us at St. Paul, don't even provide like ethnic food like after the liturgy. Like no fool, no koshari, no this stuff. American food. Because American food is going to attract Americans. They're going to feel like this is for Americans. So anything that is culturally Egyptian is going to make people feel like this is not geared for me. Okay? But anything that is American is going to make people feel like, yes, this is for me. Organization, extremely important. If we don't start our services on time or end them on time, or if everything is like hergela, okay, it's not going to work. Okay, people are going to be upset. Okay, people need to have something like, you know, the website needs to be up to date, not from 2002. Okay, because when people go to the websites and it's all like little animations and things like that, and it's talking about the last time that anyone updated it was, you know, like 2 decades ago, and you know, like that's not going to give a person an impression when they go to it. It's like, okay, these people know what they're doing, or these people are organized. we have to be organized, like run things as professionally. Like people are so used to organization even when they go to the grocery store, when they go anywhere. It's not just church. No matter where you go, we expect a certain level of organization. We expect a certain level of technology. We expect these things, so people don't want to come and they find that okay, the church is not even at the standard that they're used to. We have to have organization, and everything has to be done in a certain way. Media, very important thing. Okay? But important when we use it in the right way. Okay? People have an addiction to media. We ourselves here, maybe many of us have an addiction to media. Okay? How do we cure this is number one, and how do we leverage it? So for instance, I mean, if people want media, we can give them godly media. You know, I really want that we would have documentaries in our church in English. Small little clips about everything. You know, it's one thing for people to read, but before you give somebody a book to read, maybe some people don't like reading. Maybe they're not going to just read a long book about a topic from the first time. Maybe they need to be enticed a little bit to read. Make little videos about baptism and confirmation and history and these things in English, again, in a very organized and professional way, so that people will be able to understand what is the church about. Okay, media, people like it. But at the same time, people who are addicted to it, we have to have some kind of program that teaches people to, you know, and helps them to stop it. You know, it's destructive. How much media can I actually consume in a day? Okay? Big problem in America, and now really all over the world. Secularization, here specifically in America, you know, maybe, I mean, you guys probably remember also, but I mean, 20 years ago, for instance, I mean, this country was a lot more Christian than it is today. There's a lot more Christian influence than, you know, there is today. And now it's like Christianity is being ejected from everything in like, you know, like a very severe way, like in a very over-the-top, extreme way, to the point where, you know, if you heard it like in the news, like even if someone has their personal Bible with them somewhere where they are, like they could be ejected. Even though they're not preaching, they're not evangelizing, they're not doing anything. They just have a Bible for themselves personally. So this is a problem, and the idea that people are consider that there's kind of two distinct worlds. You have the religious world, and you have everything else. Instead, we should be bringing God with us into our world. Our world is one world. We live in the same world. Okay? Whether I'm in the church, praying liturgy, or whether I'm at work, or at school, or at home, or wherever, it's the same world. We don't live in multiple worlds. So if I believe in God, and I love God, I should bring God with me everywhere that I go, in my mind, in my words. You know, have you guys ever, you know how, you know, we say thank God, God willing, all these things. Have you ever been at work, for instance, and you were about to say God willing, and you're like, oh, no, I don't say that here. Okay? Because that's not work speak, that's only church speak. Okay? Well, what about me? What do I actually believe? Do I really, like, am I really talking about the will of God? Do I really thank God? Or am I more concerned about, I'm afraid that, you know, no, that's only I do those things in the church, I don't do them everywhere else. Okay? We bring God with us and teach people that God is everywhere, God is one. Anthropocentric theology, which we spoke just briefly about in the past 2 days, essentially saying that man is the center. Okay? In many churches, it's all about man, it's all about the person, it's not about God. In the Orthodox Church, we have theocentric theology, okay, which is that God is the center. Okay, like Tilo was saying, we're all looking at the altar. Okay, the priest is not looking at the people. We're all worshiping God together. It's not about the individual and what makes the individual feel good. We want to elevate the individual so that they rise up to be in communion with God. We're not bringing God down to be at the level of the people, so that they just stay where they are, and they're like, yeah, we're worshiping God. No. Worshiping God is difficult. Worshiping God is something that we rise. We have to bring ourselves up to worship God. Okay? When we have such long prayers, for instance, in the church, what are we doing? We're saying, we are wanting to worship God, and we want to rise to this occasion to worship God, and we struggle to stay this long in the church. When we spend like 9 hours during Good Friday, and our feet are throbbing, and everything is difficult, and we feel tired and sleepy, we're pushing ourselves to go beyond ourselves because we are not the center. If I am the center, then I'm only be there for 30 minutes to an hour, and then I'm going to go out to eat, because that's what fills my needs. But what is it that we want to do? God is timeless. He has no time. If we could spend all our time worshiping God, that's what we're going to be doing in heaven. We're trying to get a taste of heaven and pushing ourselves so that we go beyond ourselves. So it's not about me, it's about God. The last point that I want to speak about is Protestant influence. Many people who would come to the church are going to come from a Protestant background. Most of the people actually that come to the Orthodox Church come from a Protestant background. And this necessarily means that they're going to have Protestant ideas. And in whatever catechism we develop and we use, we would have to make sure that we address each of those points. Because if we don't address something, they're just not going to know that this is something that's not accepted here. And they're going to know why is it that it's not accepted, or what is it that they should be believing. So we have to understand really very well the Protestant theology, so that we can address each point and give an answer for each thing. Lest if we don't do this, more and more often, the Protestant influence is going to infiltrate the church. And that's not because Protestants are evil, or it's not because they're doing it on purpose necessarily. It's because that is the environment where so many people grew up in, and that's the de facto theology here in this country. By far, the largest Christian denomination is Protestant. So we are trying to be very careful to say, you know what, there's an Orthodox belief and an Orthodox worldview that's different than this. And we want to teach you exactly why we believe what we believe, and it's beautiful what it is that we believe, so that this influence doesn't come and infiltrate our mindset. And unfortunately, oftentimes, we imagine that what Americans actually want in the Orthodox Church is more Protestantism. So we try to take some things that the Protestant Church does or says, and we put it in our churches, and we say, you know what? American. That is not American. That is not American. That's Protestant. The people are leaving their churches to join the Orthodox Church because they don't want a Protestant church. And honestly, if somebody wants a Protestant church, they should go to one. Because the Orthodox Church is not going to make a good Protestant church. The idea of accepting Americans into the church is not just saying, you know what, we're going to have all these things that look like Protestantism, and then we're going to add a liturgy. And we're going to add a Buna. And now you've got, American Orthodox. That's not American Orthodox, okay? Orthodoxy is much deeper than that. You have to start from an understanding of where the people are coming from, but you're not going to just emulate something else and say, you know what, this is American. We have to understand the difference between American and Protestant. So these are some things to consider. Again, I didn't give a lot of answers. I just posed a lot of questions, because this is important for us to think about and digest, that if we really do want that in 50 to 100 years, let's say, I would say this would be where we want to be, that in 50 to 100 years we would find that there's more Americans in our church here than there are Egyptians. If we were actually evangelizing, if we were actually sharing the faith, and obviously there's a lot more Americans around us than Egyptians in this country. So we should be able to share the faith and attract them to the Orthodox faith, to where there would be more Americans in the church. That's where we want to be. So if imagine that in your church there was 90% Americans and 10% Egyptians, what would it look like? What would the programs look like? What would the services be like? What would the people be like? What would they say? What would they not say? That's where we're at this point now where this is what we're trying to determine. This is what we're trying to decide, is the future of how the church will look. Backwards, we're looking forwards. We're saying, where do we want to be, and how can we get there in 50 to 100 years? Okay? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So I have a question. Sorry to go back to the transgender person.
Mm-hmm.
So, without second guessing Abuna, if a person is coming to our church and they're just learning, they're not baptized, what would be the big rush to make sure that they know everything that really is going to oppose them, as opposed to just giving them time to come and digest and learn and a chance to actually to repent?
Because it can take so,
I guess that's
it can take so long.
Yeah. Is there what's the word Like, is it not fitting to have somebody come while they're still in sin?
No, I agree. I want to say that perhaps they wanted to be baptized, and so for them to be baptized, you kind of had to deal with that,
Sure.
and that's what I think happened.
But in general, so with that,
let's say it's not that.
let's say that's not that. Let's say that there's just somebody who's coming, and they've been coming for a while, but they're still in whatever lifestyle that they're in. Would there be a big, would there be pressure or a rush for us to confront those things?
No, I mean, I would say that it needs to be addressed, but maybe not necessarily individually. Okay, so all of our sins, I mean, the reason we speak about certain sins is because we all suffer from these things. So as we would, the thing that I want to emphasize is we should not shy away from speaking about things that could be offensive. So for instance, if I know that there's a homosexual person in the congregation, and now I'm preparing a sermon, and it naturally makes sense to speak against homosexuality, I shouldn't shy away from that. So, oh no, but I'm going to offend this person. Okay, so we're there because we want to tell the truth and we want to help the people, but we don't eject the people. We don't say, you know what, because you're this way, then get out. Okay, we allow them to be with us, and we have to treat them as normal. You know, if that person is going to be invited to go to some youth group or whatever outing or whatever, like they're with the people and they're learning, and as long as they're accepting of being there, even while they understand what we believe, then it's really on them. So no, we're not going to tell them, you know what, you have to leave because you believe this and this, or give them like an artificial timeline of when, you have to change this or else kind of thing, because that's going to come on their own time. Yeah. Abuna.
I was just going to say a small comment real quick. If the person agrees that, yes, this is a sin, but it's really hard for me, and I know God doesn't want this, and I want to not be able to do this again, then yeah, welcome to the club. We're all like this. But if the person is coming in intentionally willing to continue to live in the sin, we're not allowed to baptize.
I agree with
That is
that.
one of the
I agree with that. But
It's
what
just
I'm saying
existing in services.
is that there's nothing wrong with them coming and learning,
Sure.
even if they're saying, you know what, this is my lifestyle and I'm going to keep it. They're just not going to be baptized, but they're still going to come.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you speak to postmodern? Sorry, this issue of postmodernism? Because most of the people that I work with in academics are like the scientific method is their religion essentially, and so how do we begin to approach these people?
So you're speaking about modernism. Postmodernism is not so much the scientific method, it's the modernism that's the scientific method. Postmodernism is the one that's kind of like, we don't really care what is true or not, we just want to do what feels good. Modernism is, it's all about the scientific method, and really science defines what is true and what is false. I mean, some people that we call scientists are people that essentially say there is no such thing as true or false apart from science. So if science cannot address it, then it's not important, essentially. So for these people, we have to bring as much as possible of evidence, like things like Tila was talking about yesterday. All the things that are historical evidence, the things that cannot be denied, the things that there's other sources other than the Bible that confirm. All these documents we bring in, we say, this is the historical evidence for the existence of Christ, and lead people through, like a book like Case for Christ, or Case for the Creator. These are really good books for people who are modernists, because it goes through that argument from the perspective of someone who's an atheist. Okay, and how is it that you can go through the sequence of argument leading you to the belief that there was a Creator, or leading you to the belief that Christ actually resurrected from the dead. And so we have to not criticize their approach, but to give them something that feeds their mind, which is what they rely on for making choices. So we don't have to attack at the beginning and say, you know what, you're thinking the wrong way. No, we give them what they need, and to get them to begin to consider that maybe even according to their own way of thinking, there is proof, that there is evidence to show that at least it's not as clear-cut as they thought. And then maybe we can also start introducing other things, but I think at first we have to give them what they need, which is the evidence. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
well, it's cool that you have that belief that you have, but they just, they don't believe in anything, and they don't need anything. They don't feel like anything's missing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why in America it's difficult to convert many people, because they're content where they are. But there are some people who have something maybe more deep inside them, maybe in their past, maybe in their family, maybe some emotional hurt or something that actually is the reason why maybe they've rejected God, or maybe they used to believe in God or grew up believing in God or being taught about God, but then when they got older, they rejected. So a lot of times you have to find out what is the root reason. We use sometimes reasons that sound sophisticated because we don't want to reveal that maybe deep inside it's because of a hurt that I have, or because something else. So establishing a relationship with them is very important, because then maybe I could eventually get to this root reason. I could actually, they would maybe share with me more about their past, and I can get to the real problem underneath. It's not just on the level of, atheism. I had a friend who was atheist, and but he did have a lot of problems in his youth. And even though he thought that he believed, or he thought he did not believe in God simply on the basis of there was no evidence or proof, but it turned out that it was actually more as a result of something that happened to him when he was younger, and he ended up becoming a Christian. So there's a lot of times hidden reasons that maybe are not obvious. Yeah, there's somebody over here. Yeah.
So just a real quick comment about that. I think in my experience, since I've been on a lot of, since I've worked as a professional counselor for a while, what I actually find is that people have been, like you said, when they're let down so many times, that they're no longer capable of believing in something that requires faith. They need something concrete. They need something secure. And it's that search for security which makes them go to the altar of science and worship at it. St. Albert Einstein, St. Stephen Hawking, and they will never let go of it, because in their mind, this can never let me down because it's scientific proof. So I agree with you. It's difficult for them to then accept something that's metaphysical, that's mystical, because they're like, well, it's too arbitrary, and more importantly, there are things that have happened to me where I put my faith in something and I was let down. So why do it again? But the question I have is, you said something that hit home for me, which is consumerist religion, which is, I'm going to go on Amazon and I'm going to take this from Buddhism, take this from Protestantism, this from Orthodoxy. Everything's going to be shipped to me within 2 days. I'm going to put together my religion, and that's what I'm going to believe in, right? If I don't like something, I can return it. It doesn't cost anything, and get my money back, right? So we have a lot of people within 30 days. So we have a lot of people that come that are seekers, traditional seekers, and they're looking, and they're not sure if they want to stay. They're not sure if they want to take something home. They don't know, they just want to come and chill, right? But I think that so many people in my personal experience, I can't speak for anybody else, so many of our churches are made up of people who grew up in Egypt. Where in Egypt, the religion is not, Orthodoxy is not just a religion, it's an identity, right? You're either Muslim or you're Christian, or Orthodox to be specific. The church is not just a church, it's a social identity. It's a political identity. It's so much more. So the church becomes woven into almost every single aspect of their life. And then they carry that when they come here. And they raise us, our parents, many of our parents. And then they teach us that the same servants that are very, very high, that are much respected, that are way holier than anyone, most people in this room that are not wearing black hats. But because the church becomes so much more than just a religion for them, as it should be, when something comes that's considered a threat, that walks through that door, or foreign, or something that doesn't look or smell Coptic, it's said, okay, what is this? What is this doing here? Is it coming to affect us? Is it coming to hurt us? Is it coming to affect my identity? Because this is more than just the church. And so many times the general attitude of the church is, be cautious. Don't say hi. The Tunt network starts working, and everyone's like, who's this, who are they related to, who brought them to the church? And before you know it, just because you went and you said, hi, my name is so-and-so, everyone's like, what are you doing? Why? Like, who's this person? And it becomes very difficult then to minister to those people. Now, clergy are fantastic. I think, in my personal experience, clergy are fantastic. They're aware of this. They try to create little social networks around the person and help. But I think the general disposition of the congregation is like, what is this? Is it coming to threaten me? And you can't blame them, given the past history. So how do we overcome that? How do we help someone who is coming, they're shopping, and when they see something they don't like, they're going to run away. So how do we make sure they don't run away?
We're 50 years.
So that's a good question. The example I like to give is imagine that you, who live here in the United States, who speak English, who grew up here and so on. Let's say you immigrate to China, okay, and you don't know Chinese, you don't know anything about China at all, and you want to start praying in a church. You're going to maybe establish a church, and the church is going to pray in English. And you're going to find other people that are maybe Coptic that also speak English, and they're going to be coming to this church. And it's going to be your group. It's going to be your social group. It's going to be your religious group. It's going to be the only identity that you have there because you're so foreign to you to live in China. And if you have some Chinese people that are going to come to your church, you can be like, yeah, okay, but this isn't really for you. You have your own churches. Okay, and you have your own things. This is our lifeline here. This is the only thing that I have here that reminds me of home. This is the only thing I have here where I can express myself. This is the only thing I have where I can be myself. Okay, so at that point, it kind of starts becoming your identity too. We sometimes downplay the cataclysmic change that happened to our parents who came from Egypt to here. It's not just a relocation. They sacrificed their whole life to come here, and many times to give their children a better future. So it's difficult for us perhaps who are able to go to work and talk to people there and relate to people, have conversations about things. It's difficult for us maybe who understand politics and can talk about politics here and all the things that we do here. And our parents are so foreign to them. Just like if you were to go to China and people start talking to you about whatever, I can't even pronounce it, and you're like, I have no idea what that is, and I don't even care what that is, okay? So you become more and more hemmed into your society, and the more people you find that are like you don't feel a need to go out of yourself and to try to learn about all the Chinese stuff and learn the Chinese language and do this because you're just kind of content in that area. And anyone who wants to come from the outside is a disturbance. It's like, no, just leave me alone. This is the place I have for me. It's not for you. That's the mentality. Okay, that's the mentality. So one is we have to understand, it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they don't love people. It's not that they don't care about evangelism. It's that they can't do it. It's just they can't do it. Okay? The thing that they contributed to evangelism is by raising us. Okay, now that we have been raised in the church, we not only understand the theology and the religion itself and the faith, but now we also have the social skills and understanding of the society and everything to where we can now actually go and share this faith with other people, something that they could not do. So that's why we are this transition. Okay, so yeah, you're going to have a situation now where people are coming into the church and they're encountering these people that are physically unable to relate to them, to engage with them. They don't understand them at all. So one thing that I suggest to people is to, first of all, don't invite people to the liturgy, okay? Because the liturgy is going to be the place where anyone can be standing at the door when they walk in, and they might not, they might not be treated well. At the very beginning, when someone is first trying to come to the church, invite them to a Bible study that's an English Bible study. That predominantly the people that would be there would be more accepting. Some churches have actually created a separate meeting, like there's a church in Arizona where I think they have about 25 Americans that now they have their own dedicated meeting just for them, okay? That there was enough of a group to where they said, okay, you guys are so different and similar to one, similar to one another, that instead of even putting you in the Bible study with everyone else, we're going to put you in your own Bible study. Because maybe that was the only meaning available to them so that they would be able to feel comfortable. But work with them individually in teaching the faith. Sayyidina is planning to make a church for them. Okay, so if they can't integrate on a society on a social level with the people in the church, it's okay. We can't look to them and say you guys are wrong because they don't have the ability to do it. So okay, we understand that, and you guys you guys have this church, and this church is a lifeline for you, and I'm not going to take it from you and say, you know what, we're going to just change this and this and this. We're going to say, okay, these people, they're important. we love them. We're going to make their own meeting for them because that's how important they are. We're going to create a whole new church for them because that's how important they are so that they can flourish in the church. So every church is going to be different. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all. But if you begin to say, okay, you know what? Maybe talk to the people in the church and say, we want to have a young person who is available to find these people when they walk in the door, identify who they are, and then maybe follow up with them and invite them to another meeting. Don't try to intermingle them with the rest of the people in the church if the church is not welcoming. But your other option is to what? Give a sermon and tell everybody in the church, you guys should be more welcoming. That's not going to work. Okay? So instead, bring them aside separately and give them what they need separately, and let that be kind of a starting point where hopefully that group can grow over time, and those people can invite their friends to come also to this group until it grows enough to where maybe it could become a separate church. And that's, God willing, in Arizona, that's what's happening. Okay, I have only time for one more question because we're like 30 minutes over. Sandra.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to say a couple things. One, there's a Bible study in Dallas that's doing the same thing, and I attended it a few times, and the last time I attended it, MB Yusuf himself went, and an American led the Bible study in his presence, and he was totally, and he asked him, MB Yusuf asked him questions. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay. So it was amazing, basically. So that is happening, and it's wonderful. Also, another thing that we were kind of talking about is that we actually, I think the onus is on us, and I did not have this song and dance like even 2 years ago. This is completely different. The onus is on us now to actually almost evangelize to the older generation. And I think by loving them and not blaming them, we can win them over to be more accepting and, things like that. So that's another thing. Then something that Sherry said, so there are a lot of people in the world that think that they're content, but what has happened is that they have systematically numbed themselves, and everybody has a choice of anesthetic. I mean, even us, we pick, sometimes it's TV, sometimes it's food, but the thing is like, it's kind of like water. The less you have it, the less you think you need it, but the people who drink a lot of water are always wanting it, so people who think they're content, they're numb. They have an anesthetic that has been working for them, and maybe one of the ways that we'll have something that will lessen the anesthetic is our own presence in their life. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to do everything with them and be there all the time, but the God in us, may be the only way to lessen the anesthetic in their lives, so they'll see that they are actually missing something. So that's something. And then none of these are questions.
This is a full
yeah, I know. I'm capitalizing on my time because I didn't get any yesterday. Okay, and then the very last thing is that earlier this year, I went to a Pan-Orthodox retreat, and it was wonderful, and I loved it. But there were only 3 Coptics there, and we had a lot of candid conversations that I walked away basically thinking, I wish I could attend a Coptic retreat where we have these candid conversations, and thank you for facilitating that this weekend.
Thank you for Tino and Anastasio who came and gave us